there was this plant growing out of the ashes, and it was a datura plant, and it was in flower. And I've never seen a datura plant in the UK, let alone in the north of Scotland. And it was just this amazing symbolism. It's bringing that phoenix energy. This is the magic and the mystery. I've spoken before about dropping into the magic road and just being in that energy. I saw what looked like a cloud at first rising, and when I looked, I thought it was geese. They're not geese, they're all white. There was at least 50 of these swans just rising in alignment with me driving down the road. I went into this cave, and there were mushrooms growing in the cave, phosphorescent mushrooms in the depth of this cave. Caves again represent that Magdalene energy, that womb of the mother and that interconnection between them. And here we have those mycelial threads in the depth of the cave coming to life. After doing the work with retrieving and releasing and restoring the male dragons, I stopped at this cafe and I got talking to the people there. And just as I was leaving, they said, "Oh, did you know about this monastery?" and I'm like, "Oh, this is where I'm going next," right? This monastery hidden in the mountains. When I got to the building, it was surrounded by a ring of rowan trees, very, very protective. And so what the land had told me was that this was a gift from the women. Were labeled as witches, but they were also of the Rose and the Magdalene lineages that had been living in the caves in the hills. These women had gifted these men with the protection of the rowan tree because they were honorable. Welcome to the podcast, Journeys of Deepening Trust. And today I am sharing another episode that's part of the Magic Road series. Magic Road series is my gridwork travels, the stories of my gridwork travels from 2022. I've already completed those over 4 episodes. And what I want to share today is about that kind of in-between, because my next, I guess, series really is in 24. So what happens between my return in 22 and before I go away again in 2024? And that process of integrating initiations, integrating what happens when we have done big work, right? That one, we're being initiated into, but we're also being prepared potentially to initiate others into. And the thing is with earth grid work, or with any work, right? Any, whether it's healing work or initiation work, you have the threads of one that are being completed, while the threads of another are starting to emerge, or the next layer, or the next level, or the next part, however that evolves in your experience. So even before I returned, I knew that I would be going home. That's to the Highlands in Scotland, and then going back to Glastonbury, or back down to Glastonbury. I had some friends. There was a sort of group of people that I knew, and I was going to be meeting them. So I'd gone home for a couple of days. If you may remember some of the details, I had a cat sitter, and fortunately everything worked out so that cat sitter and house sitter's next job had been cancelled, so they were able to stay on for longer, which was great. It's just what I needed. So then I drove down to Glastonbury to meet this group of people. And also while I was there, I'd arranged to see some other friends who lived in that part of England, the south. That's the southwest, but also the southeast of England, as well as on the way and on the way back. one of the things I did on the way down was I stopped at Hadrian's Wall, and there was some significant work that I did there. But a lot of it was very personal work, so when we're going through a big initiation and we're integrating that, you're creating more space for more of your soul wisdom or soul aspects coming back. So in sort of shamanic terms, we may call that like a soul retrieval. So it creates this space to bring that back. So there was a lot of that that happened also in Glastonbury as well. Something that also happened was that on my way to Glastonbury, uh, my van, I have a small van, light came up and that I needed an oil change. So I had to organise an oil change for my van in Glastonbury. And this became significant again in 2024. So there is this kind of removal of all that old oil with all the old debris and yuck, and because oil's like this golden liquid. So having that changed and having it changed in Glastonbury and finding someone who was able to do that, it was amazing. So I met with that group of people. There was a place that I knew I needed to go to near Glastonbury, but I didn't go with those people. I'll come back to that because I also went to visit a friend in Norfolk who lives near the Iceni burial grounds. And so we spent some time around there. And there's a significant connection to Scotland there. There's messages that have been left in different ways, and that's as much as I'm going to say around that. But it was a really kind of interesting time. Again, you may remember at the beginning of 2022 that Roman connection was really significant because of how that energy sort of came in and was suppressing the divine feminine. So again, that energy was apparent, and with that, the Iceni and of course Boudica, very much, and her daughters very much represent that divine feminine. But not only that, is they represent more of the Emerald Order, or what's known as the Emerald Order, so that lineage, rather than the Violet Flame lineage and the Rose lineages that I'd been working with. So it starts to bring in that aspect, and again, the connection to Scotland. So that's one of the threads. There's this cave just outside Glastonbury. It's called Wookey Hole. And it's very commercial and very sort of touristic, but I knew I needed to go there. And, there's a lot of dragon energy there, and it's kind of made a little bit fun and funky and very much orientated towards children and families. So it's always curious, when you end up at a place like this, which is like that. And it's lit up with coloured lights. And so I'd gone there after coming back from Norfolk. And you could go on these tours, where you'd get all your kit to go caving, and there wasn't any space on any of the tours. So I went to the deepest cave that I could without having to go on one of those tours with all the special equipment. And this was such a deep, deep cave. And like I say, that dragon energy was very, very strong and visible within that. And when I reached that specific cave, which was the deepest one you could get into by foot, without having to crawl, and I knew that I needed to do some connection and some grid work there. And I'm like, well, how am I going to do this with all these people around, And I arrived there, and of course, Spirit orchestrates it, right? And I get into this cave, and then suddenly it empties out, and I'm left alone in this cave for about 5 or 10 minutes, and just able to spend the time making the connections that I need to make, and really tuning in. Now, if you've watched my earlier series of the 2022 grid work, this still is 2022. You may remember that the first vision that I had, that I was shown, was of this massive dragon whose kind of like head and nose and jaw, if you like, was resting on the south of England, and her body goes under the ocean and then across the mountains of Europe. And so, you know, the Alps, the Pyrenees, and then curves around the coast. And so massive dragon, right? And this is who we'd been releasing. And before I went to Europe, I'd gone to Colchester, which was like a Roman center. And that kind of started that work around, you know, if you like, her nose, her nose and her mouth. And then we kind of worked around her spine and her legs and tail, as part of the work that we were doing. So I feel this is the dragon aspect of Tiamat. That's my understanding. So this cave, again, was that part of that dragon and that connection to that dragon. There's some beautiful photographs that I took, you know, which just captures the light that's outside the entrance of the cave. So having that sort of tourism, even though it's commercial, it does keep that area protected. But by having it sort of, like I say, fun and funky, it also keeps that energy a bit high as well, because it's aimed at that kind of inner child. So that was that, really. So that was kind of tying up a few things and also bringing in new connections as well. And then I run foraging courses in the Cairngorms in the autumn or the fall, because they're mainly fungi focused. So I knew for the September one, because it was over the autumn equinox, that I would be going camping for a few days in the Cairngorms after a foraging course. So it's a couple of hours drive from where I live. So when I go there, I stay overnight. And that's what I did. What I didn't know, because I'd known 6 weeks prior that this is what I would be doing, is that this is also the time that the monarch, the Queen of England, died. And it was also the time that if I get this rightly, it was the same weekend that her body was being moved for her funeral. So Balmoral, which is where she was staying at the time, is on the outskirts of the Cairngorm mountain range, which is a massive range. Okay, and I feel it's very significant as what was shown to me. So I've written a poem called Dragon King, which is about the work that happens there. What unfolded was where I went, where I was guided to go, and I had ravens showing me the way, was that it was a crash site. And in the line of the poem, it says something like, "For he who so loved the earth became her." So what I was shown at that time was, if you look at the parallels of Tiamat as the divine crone, and Mother Earth, if you like, being her offspring, and Gaia I see as the divine child. She's the higher frequency of Mother Earth. Okay, so that's how I look at that. So you have the crone, the mother, the maiden. Okay. And so then there was this decision that was made. I've got other videos and content around this. One is called The Auroras and the Recreation, if you're interested in exploring that further. Again, I said about my poem, The Dragon King. We also work with this in my year-long apprenticeship course, The Way of the Willow, and I've got other content as well. So Tiamat made a decision as a planetary consciousness because she was under attack, okay? Because she was going to be destroyed. So by completing that destruction herself, she was then able to reclaim the sacred knowledge. And by reclaiming the sacred knowledge, she could then transfer that to the new planet. So we experience things in linear time, but it's not as straightforward as linear, okay? But we'll work with that in the best way we can. So there was this retrieval, and she then goes through the portal. She dies through the portal with that knowledge. So that she could do that, the masculine guardians, because it wasn't her divine masculine as such, but it was a masculine guardian. The dragon, he and his battalion were the ones to protect her doing that, so that she could do that, and so that that work could be completed. And there's a lot of grief, okay, around that, or there has been, because I've been working with my groups in the different ways to really alchemize that. So I get to the crash site, and there's the male dragon, who's the leader, who was the one who was protecting her. And we bring him to restoration. And underneath one of his wings, he's holding the future lineage. So it's also, the importance of, as that protector, not just of her, but of that future lineage. So at that point as well, this is also what's called the convergence point. So there was this convergence point of, because the divine crone had to be restored before Mother Earth could further evolve into Gaia. So it was bringing together all of those parallel lives of Mother Earth, if you like, as a planetary consciousness, so that they could become one, so that they can start to go through the portal that's needed, so that they can then, so she can then evolve into the ascended version of herself, Gaia. Okay. And so that was that completion of that work at that point. Like I say, that poem kind of says it all, really. But there's more there. One of the other things I was then guided to do was to go to Balmoral and work with the energies there and in that area. Now, I don't know if you know, but there's a pyramid that Queen Victoria built in honor of Prince Albert on the Balmoral estate. And there were other things within the landscape outside Balmoral, between Balmoral and sort of Aviemore, which again is on the edges of the Cairngorms. And what I found in the pyramid was this inversion technology, okay, this sort of high level inversion technology. So it was sort of working with that. And then it was connected in to like this battalion of dragons, of golden dragons that had been captured, and their energy was being used and siphoned. So it was about freeing those dragons those masculine dragons, those golden dragons who have been part of the battalion, it's the best way I can describe it, that was sent to protect Tiamat in her evolution into Mother Earth, or into giving birth to Mother Earth, however you want to view that, because we're looking at it from the linear. And so that's what we did. That was big work in itself. Okay, but it was obviously an important part of this process, of unraveling these different threads. And shortly after that, I became a grandmother. My granddaughter was born, and that also, that was very special. I'm not going to share those details publicly, but it was very special because also it's about a stepping into eldership, that becoming a grandmother, especially after that year, you know. So that beginning of that eldership. So we're still in 22. There's still a lot happening. After she was born, a teacher of mine had come from Australia, and she brings through an energy called Palawa that I'd trained in. And so then was doing my teacher training with her for that. But Palawa isn't something that I practice at the moment, but I knew that I needed to go there for that energy transmission from her. And this was very special. This is when the swan energy started to come in. There were so many things that happened on that journey to Wales. And I've never seen a flock of swans more than, say, about 11 or 12. And I was driving down this road. I've spoken before about dropping into the magic road and just, being in that energy. And I was driving along this part of the road, and I remember it was sort of cloudy. It was early in the day, so the sort of sunlight was a bit shimmery through the mist and the cloud. And out the corner of my eye, I saw this, what looked like a cloud at first, rising. And when I looked, I realized it was, at first I thought it was geese, and I was thinking, they're not geese, they're all white. And there was about 50 of these swans just rising in alignment with me driving down the road. So kind of that brings in that swan energy, which, if you remember, was present very early on in France. There was a lot of swan energy, and then as I kind of move into Italy, that kind of moved more into the background. So again, we have this framing that can happen around a piece of work. What was also interesting for me with this journey is there's passing of the baton. So at the time, I had almost like an urgent message to go somewhere in Canada to do a piece of work. And it was like, oh, I'm really being called. I'm not going to say much about it, because I feel there's still something personal there for me. And there was this sense of that I was handing over the urgency of that work to somebody else, because this person then turns up in Alaska a few weeks later. Like, okay. And Alaska was one of the places I was thinking of going to. And so it's like, okay, we never know why we really are going to the places that we're going to. We might have expectations, but it's never really for the reasons that we think we are. That's the most significant part of what I wanted to say there. So then we move into 2023. New grandmother. My daughter is a mother, and so there's these 3 generations of women. So these times are weaving, and I know that I need to prepare my house to sell. That was one of the messages that I'd got while I was in Switzerland, was that I needed to sell my cottage. I needed to, the message was go where the people are. Another thing that happened was that there was a retreat that I really wanted to go on with a medicine woman who I have a lot of respect for. I still work with her. Um, she works with similar energies that I do, and she's probably the only other person I know who has the same understanding of the dear mothers and similar components, the fungi kingdoms that I did at that point. And so I really wanted to go to that. And it was in the Appalachians in America. So you can see how I've been rediverted from Canada to going to the Appalachians in America. And at that time, I didn't know how I was going to afford to go because it was unlikely I'd get everything ready to sell my cottage by that point. And other things were unfolding. But we'd spoken, I was invited on the retreat, and it was February. And so I'd asked Spirit for confirmation. Now, one of the things we were going to work with is Amanita muscaria or fly agaric, which you may know as the red mushroom with the white spots. So again, there's more energy of the Emerald Order coming in here as well. Okay, because this is European medicine. So I was put up this request to Spirit. And I was walking along the shore, and sure enough, I found this round red stone with lots of white quartz bits in it that looked just like, very similar to a fly agaric mushroom. And I was like, okay, that's my confirmation that I'd be going on this retreat, which I think was then September, October. So that's in 2023. Because, in February, you won't find fly agarics. They're usually, autumn or fall mushrooms. So there was the preparation for that, the not knowing of how that the finance for that was going to manifest. So that was one unfolding theme. And so it was quite a gentle time. I spent a lot of time in caves and mountains and with waterfalls and the kind of energy that we have a lot of here. There were also some sweat lodges, and for the first time I was a firekeeper at sweat lodge. So holding the masculine energy, so we're going back to that masculine, holding that masculine energy, me and another sister. So that's quite a privilege, to have almost like a kind of role reversal, if you like, of holding the masculine fire for the men and women who are then within the lodge of the water energy that is very much the divine feminine. So that was an important thread in that balancing, because if you remember, again, talking about framing, I was holding the sweat lodge in Italy, in the Alps, and here I was again. This sweat lodge was on the edge of the Cairngorms, in Aberdeenshire. Cairngorms is massive, and so there's that framing that happened. So it's really important. But of course, the slight difference was before I was facilitating and the pourer for the sweat lodge in Italy. So I was holding the space of the divine feminine, and then it comes around. So I'm holding the space of the divine masculine. So it creates that balance. So that, yeah, there was a lot of exploration and just really connecting in with the land in different ways. And like I say, much of it was like this kind of big soul retrieval and retrieving of energy, as well as picking up these threads. I also had a camping trip. I was doing some shamanic training, teacher training, as well. So it seemed to be a year of doing more training to be a teacher, like formal training to be a teacher. And so afterwards, I'd gone and camped on this beach by the North Sea, in the south of Scotland, and spent a few days there, and really had some beautiful experiences. The significant one, though, was where I was shown the land bridge that from Lemuria, of the point where many of us crossed over as refugees from Lemuria, which is a significant part. That was just a confirmation from what I'd experienced in Orkney of that route, though we had other means of movement, shall I say. So we may not necessarily have travelled over land in the same way, but I was being shown this land bridge. And if you remember, when I went to Europe, I went in the Eurotunnel, so I went under the water, and we were working with that connection and that reconnection. And so I was then being shown that as well. So that bringing in the connection to Orkney from there. So I'm going to go back the way a bit, because this has reminded me of something else that happened when I was in the Cairngorms. After doing the work with retrieving and releasing and restoring the male dragons, I was again driving through, and I found this little cafe, and I stopped at this cafe, and I got talking to the people there, and they had some mushrooms in the garden they wanted me to identify for them. So I had my breakfast there, and we did that. And then just as I was leaving, they said, "Oh, did you know about this monastery?" and I'm like, "Oh, this is where I'm going next," right? I just knew it. This monastery hidden in the mountains, in the Cairngorms. Strictly speaking, it wasn't a monastery. It's something called a seminary, where they trained Catholic priests. And this was during the time when the Catholics were being persecuted, so it was done in secret. And then the priests would be sent to Italy, so there's the Italian connection again, to complete their training. So this was in this seminary. So I went there. There's a car park. There was a short walk, really, to the area. But the land also told me something else. It was really clear when you got there, this ceremony, which is just like an old building. And there was also, whiskey smuggling and distilling and all sorts of other things happening in those hills, right? But when I got to the building, it was surrounded by a ring of rowan trees, or mountain ash, you may call them if you're in the Americas. And the rowan tree is very much known as a witch's tree. Many of the British or European trees are known as that, but very, very protective. They have these bright red berries in the autumn. And so what the land had told me was that this was a gift from the women. So the women, I'm getting chills as I'm talking about this, that were labeled as witches, but they were also of the Rose and the Magdalene lineages that had been living in the caves, in the hills, in the Cairngorms. And so, if you like, they were excluded in the same way that the Catholics had been excluded. So here we are with these two peoples who normally wouldn't be associated with each other, but these women had gifted these men with the protection of the rowan tree, because of they were honorable. Okay, they protected the women, so as much as they were in hiding, they could give the women, if they wanted it, a way out and be able to integrate back into society. And so this is why the women had gifted them this protection. They also had a lot of herbal medicine and things that would support the men in different ways. So there was this beautiful connection that was formed there. And this is something that I've been shown within the Catholic Church, is as much as they were a persecutor, they were also a protector. There's kind of, two sides, and it really does depend on the individuals who are there within that. So that was the case in this case. So that was something really beautiful that I was shown, and important, because again, here we have, the Rose Magdalene lineage, very far north in Scotland. Yeah. So back to where I was with the sweat lodges, the fire energy, the balances of the masculine and feminine. So you can see these threads coming through, and the restoration of that relationship and that honoring, as well. It was a really hot summer. I've also facilitated a vision quest for a young man, and that brings in the thread of a Nordic tradition, which isn't one of my main threads, but it kind of pops up from time to time. So it feels apt to bring that there. We did it through distance, so we kind of established that. Him and his family are based in Germany, but it was a very, very strong Nordic energy from that kind of Nordic pantheon that came through with that. And one of the things that I did early summer 2023, as well as those sort of various travels that I had a big bonfire, and I burned a lot of paperwork, a lot of old diaries, a lot of old stuff, things that I've been holding on to. I'm very much a paperwork person. Any new technology, I take my time before I can okay, I get the hang of this. It was just time to burn it all, without reading through 20 years, possibly. And so that's what I did. One of the things that I really want to mention, because as you can see, there's this fungi theme coming in. I'm holding foraging courses. I'm about to go on this retreat in the Appalachians, where we're working with Amanita muscaria, flyagric. And in one of the caves, on the North Sea journey, I went into this cave, and there were mushrooms growing in the cave, like fluorescent mushrooms or phosphorescent mushrooms. And I've never seen anything like it. It's like right at the end, in the depth of this cave, there was this mushroom. So, if you think of the cave, a lot of caves again represent that Magdalene energy, that kind of womb of the mother and that interconnection between them. And here we have those mycelial threads in the depth of the cave coming to life, fruiting, because the mushrooms are the fruiting part of the mycelium. So there's always these little, like within the bigger messages, there's always other information that's coming through. Too much to go into all of it here. So I was preparing for the retreat. I was kind of paying what I could for it when I could. I used credit cards to book the tickets. I was preparing the cottage for sale. I'd put that up for sale. I'd had quite a lot of interest. Somebody was able to come and dog sit and cat sit for me. So that was really great. I was only able to go for 2 weeks. So that was the plan. And before I left, this bonfire that I'd had in the early summer, so we're kind of coming into the autumn now. Before I left, I'd come down to my land, where I am now. I can see the bonfire pile from here. There was this plant growing out of the ashes, and it was a datura plant, and it was in flower. And I've never seen a datura plant in the UK, let alone in the north of Scotland. And it was just this amazing symbolism, because not only was that growing out of the ashes, so it's bringing that phoenix energy, but the datura itself represents new beginning and magical new beginnings, because of all the plants that could have been growing out of there, it was one that isn't in the north of Scotland. This is the magic and the mystery of these things that happen at the times, right? That they happen. Yeah. Next off to America. Now, I hadn't been to America since I was 17, so it had been a long time. And I was looking forward to it. And, I had a couple of weeks, and there was this really wonderful retreat that I was so looking forward to. So a week before I left, I had some money returned to me, which I thought I was never going to see again. So it was a nice little lump sum, and suddenly I'm thinking, I can extend my trip. And I got given a specific date to come back on. So I checked with the woman who was coming to look after my dog, and she was quite happy to stay for, I think it was about 2 months, just over 2 months. So it's a date in November that I was given. And so here I am going off to America. I had a friend there that I was borrowing some camping stuff from, so I didn't need to bring my camping stuff, so I could go off and do some camping. And so I was really, really excited about my journey to the Appalachians, and it's the most wonderful retreat. The sort of the grid work and the earth work. Some of the personal parts of my journey, they're what helped me to sort of anchor in and expand and integrate, and really assimilate the work that I've done. But I want to illustrate that as those of us as grid workers need that support with that work in the different ways we may receive that support. So one of the first things I saw, I was staying in this nice little place, Airbnb place, and that first morning that I walked outside, and I really wanted to see hummingbirds more than anything. And it was a bit late in the year to be seeing hummingbirds, but I really wanted to see them. And I'd gone outside, it's sort of beautiful and sunny and warm, compared to Scotland, though we'd had a wonderful summer in Scotland that year. And so it's like this extension of summer. And as I was stood outside, just enjoying being there, this hummingbird, this sort of emerald green hummingbird, came up and flew literally right in front of me with its little wings. And I was in tears. And then all these birds, it felt like there was this circle of birds around me, the crows, the American crows, and other birds. And it felt like this welcoming committee. It was just like, and this tiny little hummingbird, flying in front of me. It was just one of these beautiful moments. And the other thing that I saw, which, considering I'd only been in the States a few days, was a bobcat. When I went to collect this camping stuff, I'd gone for this walk, and I was walking down this path, and I just saw this cat looking at me, and I'm like, that's not a domestic cat. It was just crouched looking at me, and I looked at it and it looked at me, and it kind of just slunk off, and I could tell it, like, its tail was quite short. I knew it wasn't a mountain lion. But I found out it was a bobcat. And what was beautiful is in the spot where it was, there were some white Amanita muscarias growing, because there's a lot of different varieties of fungi in the States that we don't necessarily have here in Europe. So I spent some beautiful time in the Appalachians. The mountain is so vast. And what's really important, I guess, about the Appalachians is that mountain range originally, it was connected to the mountains of the Highlands, as several people mentioned where in places, different places that I stayed. Oh, well, it's the same. And that's why a lot of Scots and Irish ended up in that part of the world. And there's this thing, is it bluegrass? Music that's descended from the kind of Irish and Scottish traditional music. So really, really special time. You know, the mountains have been calling me so strongly, but again, bringing in that line of connection. And we're talking about the different soul retrievals as well, connected with past lives there, which were again connected to the Rose lineage of the mountain people who were white settlers who lived in the mountains but were cleared to make room for the state parks. So there was work around that because a lot of these people had been cleared from their lands in Scotland and Ireland. And then the same thing happened to their ancestors. So that was sort of a big, very sort of personal, but also collective work and connections there. There's one place called Dragon's Tooth, which I climbed up Dragon's Tooth. I went up quite a few, I guess, mountain peaks maybe, but the roads kind of go higher in America. So it's a lot easier to get high up into the mountains without having to walk all the way from the bottom to the top. So some beautiful walks, beautiful connections, a lot of dragon energy. Again, working with the crows, working with the ravens, working with the serpent energy and the deer mothers as well. And that's all I really feel called to share about that journey. Like it felt like a knitting together of some threads of a connection that had been geographically anyhow broken. And I know I'm not the only one who's worked with that, re-establishing those connections between the European settlers and Europe. Geographically, those descended from the European settlers to the actual geographical Europe, and the importance of that. You know, when we try to reclaim our own indigenous heritage, which is so connected with the Emerald Order and the Rose lineage. And yeah, there's other aspects of the stories of the Rose lineage as far as Scotland is concerned, how that kind of then weaves in. But that then brings us into 2024. So I'm really shared these kind of bitty stories of that year, as I've mentioned earlier, as just an example of these gridwork travels with working with the earth grids. And we can be on these really massive journeys doing really big work. But the in-between, that integrating those initiations that happen when we're doing that work, because that work, yes, it's because we have the capacity to do it. Yes, it's because we have permission to do it. But we are also being initiated into something at the same time. It's reciprocal. Okay. So there is that time then that can happen of integrating that and really embodying that experience, which is the gift that you receive from doing that work. And so it's important to allow that to happen. I've written quite a few blog posts around some of these journeys, which I will link below. I'll also link the Dragon King poem, as I've mentioned that a few times, but there's also some other poems from some of those events that I've referred to. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and sending you so much love from my heart to yours.